All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to start the webinar in 1 or 2 minutes, so please sit tight. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Schaefer. I'm president of Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. And I know that we've got many of you joining from Japan Society of Northern California and some of our other excellent peer societies from around the country. So a very warm welcome to you all. We're also delighted today to have the partnership of our good friends and neighbors, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and thanks to those of you joining from the SPF USA network as well. A quick word about Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. We are a 501c3 nonprofit membership organization that serves the national capital region by promoting the grassroots relationship between the United States and Japan through programs including our region's largest Japanese language school, our Tanaka and Green Scholarship Program, our National Japan Bowl, and the Sakura Matsuri Japanese Street Festival, which brings 40,000 Americans to Pennsylvania Ave in the heart of the nation's capital to celebrate Japan, its friendship, and its amazing culture. Tonight, we're gathering on a completely momentous stretch of days for the US-Japan relationship, with Japan having held a significant upper house election just 2 days ago, and yesterday having succeeded in forging a trade agreement with the United States. And all of that being the case, this is excellent timing and a bit of a relief, frankly, to take a breath and hold a program that has nothing to do with either trade or elections. So we're delighted to have with us Ambassador Jim Zumwalt to share reflections and stories from his recent completion of the Shikoku Pilgrimage, or Henro. Ambassador Zumwalt has had a long and prestigious career in the United States Foreign Service, including serving as ambassador to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau before his retirement from federal service in 2017. Ambassador Zumwalt has deep experience in Japan, having lived there for a combined nearly 2 decades, including serving as Deputy Chief of Mission of U.S. Embassy Tokyo, where, among other things, he managed the U.S. Embassy's response to the so-called triple disasters stemming from the Great Tohoku earthquake. Ambassador Zumwalt served after retirement as president of SPF USA. Currently, he is in his 5th year as chair of the board of Japan America Society of Washington, D.C., which importantly makes him my boss. I'm also really grateful to be able to hand off moderating duties tonight to my longtime friend and colleague Shanti Shoji, who is director of programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. I first worked with Shanti in her capacity as co-founder of a truly excellent U.S.-Japan educational organization with which many of you are familiar, that's Kizuna Across Cultures. With Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, Shanti launched the Women's Advancement Network, as well as activities on integrating WPS, Women, Peace, and Security, into the U.S.-Japan alliance. I'm grateful to Shanti also for supporting the Society through being a central member of our John and Hiroko Malat Leadership Award Committee. Shanti, like me, is an alumni of the JET program. Unlike me, Shanti was fortunate to have been stationed in Shikoku, and I think all of the above makes Shanti the perfect person to moderate the discussion that will follow Ambassador Zumwalt's remarks. Let's see, quick run of show for tonight. Ambassador Zumwalt will present for about 45 minutes. If all the right things are happening, speakers, but not audience members, will be visible, which I'm starting to regret because as I scan through the list, I'm seeing well over 100 good friends and colleagues, and I'd love to see your faces as well. So thank you again for joining us tonight. All of you will have access to the chat. And so during the Ambassador Zumwalt's remarks, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat. And if you feel so compelled, you can clap or do thumbs up or whatever. What you won't be able to do is we're not using the raise hand feature tonight. So you can enter your questions in the chat, but don't raise your hand, please. And I'm going to improvise a little bit and ask, when you enter your question, please tell us where you're dialing in, that's dated, where you are joining us from, because I believe we've got people from all across the nation, if not in Japan and elsewhere. Let's see.
Ryan, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Shanti.
So sorry, just one clarification. The Q&A box is where we'll be accepting, there's no chat. Someone was asking about the chat. There's actually no chat, but the Q&A box, if everyone can put their question there, I'll be fielding them and really looking forward to seeing everyone's questions to ask. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
No. Thank you for the interjection. Final housekeeping remarks from me is that this is on the record. This is being recorded, and it will be available on the JASW, Japan America Society of Washington, D.C. YouTube channel following the event, and we'll send out information on that after the event. We will conclude tonight at 8:15. And with that, a quick thank you to my colleagues who've contributed to this effort, in particular, the two who are running the show right now, that's Society's Executive Director, Saori Kobayashi, and our Communications Manager, William Denton, as well as SPF USA's Senior Program Officer, John Seymour, who's also on hand. We appreciate you very much. And with that, let me now turn things over to JASWDC Chairman, Jim Zumwalt.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be here with everyone this evening, and thank you all for joining us. I know everyone has a busy schedule, and I really appreciate that you're taking time to engage with us about the Shikoku Henro. I walked along the Shikoku Henro path this year from February 25th to April 19, starting at Ryozenji Temple in the suburbs of Tokushima City. So in total, my pilgrimage in Shikoku lasted for 54 days. That was 3 rest days and 51 walking days. A total of 1,300 kilometers and 13,500 meters of elevation gain, about 40,000 feet. Shikoku does not have high mountains, but there's a lot of up and down and very few flat areas, as I learned as I was along here. Next slide, please. And I also wanted, Ryan already mentioned Japan America Society of Northern California, but I wanted to thank the NAJAS, our partner, the National Association of Japan America Societies. There are many Japan America Societies around the country, and I encourage people who've come in today, you're here because you're interested in Japan, and if you're not already a member of your local society, I urge you to reach out because these societies provide excellent programs like this one that you'll be interested in knowing about. Next slide, please. So let me get to the Shikoku Henro route. On the right, there's a map of Japan where little arrows pointing to the Shikoku, the smallest of the 4 main islands. And on the left is a enlarged map of Shikoku with the Henro route and the temples numbered from 1 to 88. There are many religious pilgrimages around the world, including the Hajj undertaken by Muslims, the Hindu pilgrimage known as Kumbh Mela in India, and of course, Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem, to Rome, and to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. I myself have twice walked pilgrimage routes to Santiago, once from France and once from Portugal to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. So the Shikoku Henro pilgrimage was my third. But this is a very unique pilgrimage because unlike other religious pilgrimages, there's no destination and no fixed starting point. The route is a circle. You can start anywhere along the route you want and walk. And at the end of the pilgrimage, you're back in the same geographic location where you started. So the absence of a geographic destination compared to, say, Mecca or Rome focuses the pilgrim on personal and spiritual development with the goal of helping the individual gain insights into life's true nature. So let me now back up a little bit and talk about the historical origins of the Shikoku Henro. And the main character in this story is a Buddhist monk named Kobo Daishi or Kūkai. Kūkai is his posthumous name, and that means sky and sea in Japanese. And this comes from one of his writings where he talked about engaging in 60 days of ascetic practices in a cave along the ocean. And during this time, he was reciting the sutras, and all he could see was the sky and the sea out from his the entrance to his cave. So that became his posthumous name. And Kobo Daishi is a respectful term, which essentially means the great teacher of the Dharma. But he was actually a historical figure. And oh, by the way, on the right is a statue of Kūkai. And every temple, I would say, certainly a lot of the 88 temples, has a statue of Kobo Daishi somewhere on the temple grounds. And they all claim some kind of connection to this historical figure. He was born in Shikoku at the present site of a large temple named Zentsuji. He was born to a minor noble family. He was a brilliant scholar. He began studying Chinese classics at the age of 6, and he was sent to university in Japan's capital city of Nara. But he abandoned his studies, and he was on a track to getting a nice position in the royal government there. But he abandoned that in order to study Buddhism. And he returned to Shikoku and lived for 7 years as an itinerant monk who wandered around the island, sometimes stopping at temples to study with the priest, and sometimes walking around the island, begging for food and living off of the kindness of strangers. He does talk about having studied for 6 months at Kakurinji, one of the most spectacular temples up on the top of a mountain. And he then writes about having attained enlightenment in this cave that I mentioned, which is on the southern side of the island. And although it's not a temple, you can visit the cave where it is said that he attained enlightenment. Kūkai then traveled to China as part of a Japanese Buddhist delegation, where he traveled to Chang'an, which is now the city of Xi'an, the Tang Dynasty capital of China. And he studied under a Chinese Buddhist master of esoteric Buddhism. And he must have been a very charismatic figure, because here's a foreigner coming to the school of Chinese monks. And within 3 years, his Chinese master designated him as the heir apparent and the next leader of this religious or this Buddhist sect. So he returned to Japan and introduced Shingon Buddhism, which is a type of esoteric Buddhism, to Japan. Because of his connections to the imperial court, he was very favored, and he was granted a great deal of land in Wakayama Prefecture, where he established the center of Shingon Buddhism at Koyasan. It's just a mountainous area in Wakayama Prefecture. And as I said, of these 88 temples along the pilgrimage, many of them claim a connection to him, and in many cases, there's a story of some miraculous event that occurred at the temple. Next slide, please. The first pilgrim is also a historical figure, Emon Saburo. He was a very wealthy individual, but also known as being very stingy. And one day, according to the story, when Kūkai wandered to his house with his begging bowl asking for food, Emon Saburo broke his begging bowl and sent him away. And from that day forth, he experienced a series of misfortunes, and only much later did he realize that his mistreatment of this itinerant monk had been what started his misfortunes. So Emon left his home and began wandering the island of Shikoku, traveling in a clockwise direction, visiting temples, trying to find this monk so he could ask for forgiveness and hopefully get away from these misfortunes that were occurring to him. So according to the story, Emon circled the island of Shikoku 20 times visiting temples, but he did not find Kūkai. And finally, in a remote mountain area, which is near Temple 11 these days, he collapsed from exhaustion and hunger. And as he was dying, Kūkai appeared before him and absolved him of his sins and sort of eased his suffering in his final moments. And Emon asked Kūkai as his final favor. He said he wanted to be reborn as a rich man so he could endow and help his family Buddhist temple, which had fallen into disrepair. So Kūkai buried Emon and placed a stone in Emon's right hand. And this statue on the left, by the way, is the place where Emon Saburo is supposed to have died and where this encounter occurred. It's between temples 11 and 12 on the path. Soon thereafter, in the other side of Shikoku, a baby was born near Emon Saburo's home, and the baby had a stone in its hand. And when they opened the hand of the baby and took out the stone said, "I am Emon Saburo reborn." And now at this site is a magnificent temple called the Ishiteji, the Stone Hand Temple. And this story, could you have the next slide, please? This story of Emon Saburo is inscribed on the rock, on a large rock cliff face behind this temple. But you can see even today it's a very nice Buddhist temple nestled among the hills in the forest. And it was renamed the Stone Hand Temple because of the story of Emon Saburo being born or reborn with a stone in his hand. Next slide, please. So now let me talk. I've talked about the first great figure of the pilgrimage and then talked about the first pilgrim, but let me talk a little bit about the Shikoku Henro today. Of course, the Henro pilgrimage did not exist in Kūkai's time. Most of the 88 temples, though, had already been built, and the reason they claim a connection to Kūkai is because he was visiting these temples in his wanderings around Shikoku. But there wasn't a formal pilgrimage. There was a tradition of itinerant monks wandering the wilderness and visiting temples, and often they would stay at the temples for shelter and food as they were traveling. But there wasn't really a formal pilgrimage and no grouping of temples. So the first time the pilgrimage that we know today was codified was in the 17th century during the Edo period, when a Buddhist monk named Shinnen traveled from the Kansai area by ferry to Tokushima and began walking around Shikoku. And he visited these 88 temples and wrote essentially kind of a diary or a memory of his visit, but this became almost like a travel guide. And he numbered the temples from 1 to 88, starting with Ryosenji. And the only reason Ryosenji is not more significant than other temples, but this was the closest temple to the ferry that he took from Osaka to get to the island of Shikoku. And so that was Temple 1. And as you travel around the island in a clockwise direction, the final temple you would get to before you get back to Temple 1 is Temple 88. And so he numbered these temples, and this began the pilgrimage as we know it today. And the number of pilgrims dramatically increased beginning in the Edo period. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about pilgrim attire. This is a picture of me walking, by the way, and the main things that pilgrims have are a white vest, which you can see behind me here, called a hakui, and the sedge hat, which many pilgrims wear. And I can say from personal experience, the sedge hat or the sugegasa is very good when it's hot and sunny, and it's also very effective in the rain, but it's not so good in the wind. And there were many days I couldn't wear it because it was just too windy and the hat would blow off. There's a bag for religious items called a zudabukuro, where people put their religious items, their candles and incense. Pilgrimage book. Actually, let me hold that up and you can this is a pilgrimage book that you get and use for your travel. And also your osame fuda, which are these paper slips that I'll talk about later. And then people usually carry a rosary or what they call a mala. I always refer to it as ojuzu, but it's essentially a Buddhist rosary. So that is the attire that pilgrims wear as they are walking around the island. And this identifies people who are walking, particularly when you're in cities and there's a lot of people doing a lot of things, but you can spot a pilgrim because of the attire they're wearing. And many people appreciated the chance to interact with pilgrims as they're walking along the way. So the 88 temples on the pilgrimage, as I mentioned, all claim a connection to Kobo Daishi. In many cases, there is a miracle that occurred. For example, at one temple, there is a deep well that he is alleged to have dug because the temple had problems getting fresh water. In another case, he is said to have cured someone from blindness. And today, many people visit the temple with prayers for themselves or others who have eye problems, asking for help in being cured from their illness. But the other characteristic of these 88 temples, in addition to having a story or a connection, in addition to the main hall, Buddhist temples in Japan all have a main hall, and there's some kind of religious image housed in the hall. It might be a statue of the historical Buddha, or it might be a statue of the Buddha of healing or the medicinal Buddha. It might be a bodhisattva of compassion or some other figure. But in addition to the Hondo or the main hall, these 88 temples all have what they call a Daishido, the great teacher hall. And in this secondary hall, there is always an image of Kobo Daishi where pilgrims come and venerate him. So in a traditional Buddhist temple, pilgrims would come and worship at the main hall and pay respects. But in the temples along this pilgrimage, in addition to going to the main hall, people also go to the Daishido. And traditionally, people recite the Heart Sutra, which is something that came from Sanskrit via China to Japan. And it's considered to contain the essence of Buddhist teaching. It takes about maybe 4 minutes or so to recite. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about the Osame Fuda, what I mentioned, these little white slips. This was something that was new to me. I visited many Buddhist temples in Japan and had learned quite a bit about how people engage in religious rituals, but I'd never heard of or seen these Osame Fuda before. Literally, it means, you know, the piece of paper with your desire or your wish or your prayer on it. And you buy a pad of these. Pretty much any temple along the way sells these. And before you visit the temple, you put in what it is you're wishing for. It might, Japanese people might, a lot of people were wishing for their grandchild to pass the examination, or for a safe birth for their daughter's child, or people might wish for, larger things like world peace, or some wish they have that they put on the slip. They put their name, the date they visited, their age, and then their address. And in my case, for address, I just put USA. I wasn't going to write my whole address down. But you leave this slip in this silver box that's just to the left, both in the main hall and the Daishi hall. So you leave 2 slips at every temple. And the priests will collect these slips and present them to the image so that the Buddha is aware of the wishes of the people who've come to worship at the temples. Oh, and sorry, I should say before the next slide, on the right is a picture. On the left is my Osame Fuda and my name and so forth. On the right is a silver Osame Fuda. And this, people who used silver Osame Fudas, that meant that they had undergone or completed the pilgrimage 25 times. And pilgrims who completed the pilgrimage 50 times had gold Osame Fudas. So this wasn't so common. This wasn't so common for, but the silver one that I have was from a person who I met along the way who was trying to help me, or I was trying to help him because he was taking around 2 Philippine pilgrims and he was having some trouble speaking to them in English. So I translated for him a little bit. Let's see, next slide, please. Okay, I had showed you my no Kyo Cho, or the book I had, and this is a picture On the left is a picture of the book that's opened. My book had one page for each of the 88 temples, and I would open when I got to the no-kyo-cho, or the temple office. I would hand my book to the person inside. Sometimes it was a priest, sometimes it was a paid employee who was good at calligraphy. And I would say, yoroshiku onegai shimasu, thank you. And they would take the book from me and write in calligraphy and then make these 3 vermilion stamps that you can see on the left side of the book. The stamps, there were 3, and it was always the same at each temple. The first stamp was the number of the temple, I think this one is temple 57. And in the middle is the chief image and a Sanskrit character with the first Sanskrit character of the chief image at the temple. And on the lower left is the hanko, or the seal of the chief priest. It attests to the veracity of what's written on the paper. And then the calligraphy in the middle was the name of the temple. The right was the chief image, and the left was an attestation that the bearer of this book has participated in religious rituals at the temple. And the reason for this started during the Edo period, when I mentioned that the pilgrimage started then, but in the Edo period, people were not allowed to travel around the country for security reasons. There were very tight controls, and indeed on many parts of the walk I did, there were remains of customs points where people would check and make sure you had permission to travel. And this no-kyo-cho was essentially attesting that you are a legitimate pilgrim. The priests are saying that you have worshipped at the temple, and this would allow you to go through these checkpoints and go on to the next temple. So now let me talk a little bit about, because the route is interesting, but for me, the memories I have the strongest are the various people I met. And let me just tell you a few stories about them. Of course, first is just the many, many pilgrims I met along the way. Since probably 95% of pilgrims are walking in a clockwise direction, and you all tend to have a certain amount that you cover each day, you tended to run into the same pilgrims very frequently and got to know each other. Most of the time when I was walking, I was by myself, because people walk at different paces, and often the temples are quite far apart. In fact, in some days you'd walk 2 or 3 days before you got to the next temple. But often you would meet pilgrims at a temple because you're spending time there doing your religious rituals, and often, frankly, just resting. Temples were a nice place to sit under a tree and catch your breath. So often we'd meet pilgrims at temples, and on the right was Ryosuke, who was a student. He was a junior in college, and he was using his spring break to walk the pilgrimage, and we met at several temples. But then I lost track of him because he had to get back to school on April 1st and had a much more ambitious schedule than I did. On the left were 2 temples that I met at a inn where we were staying. In fact, this is our picture we took as we were leaving the next morning. On the left was a retired elementary school principal, and I was still a rookie pilgrim at this point. I think it was my 3rd or 4th day walking, and he took me under his wing. He was an experienced teacher and taught me a lot about how you behave and how you act on the pilgrimage and how you worship at the temples. He told me a lot about the history of Shikoku. It was very, very interesting. I think we had 3 nights in a row where we stayed at the same temple, and I really enjoyed my encounters with him. Next slide, please. One big topic we had when we were at night talking to other pilgrims was the weather. What's it going to be like tomorrow? And I did change my plans sometimes. We did have a few days where it was raining pretty hard and we got pretty wet. That's just part of when you walk for 55 days, you're going to have some days without good weather. To prepare for this talk, I went back and read my journal, and I was actually surprised how many days I had where I had to wear my poncho. I think there were 10 or 11 days where I had to put my poncho on because of rain. There were really only 3 days like this where it rained so hard that we got completely soaked. I mean, there was nothing that wasn't wet, but generally my poncho was pretty good. If it was a light rain and intermittent rain, my poncho was pretty good at keeping the rain out. I had 2 days of conversational snow. What I mean by that is the snow was falling, but it didn't accumulate. I had many days of heavy wind where I couldn't wear my hat. But what I remember now more is the sunny days where it felt great to be outside walking. And certainly while it was cold when I started, about halfway through, I made up a package and mailed home my ski cap and my gloves and my long underwear and my puffy jacket because spring had come and I didn't need that kind of things anymore. And so especially the second half of the pilgrimage, I had very nice spring weather. And I would say about 20 days of walking, I experienced cherry blossoms. And the reason for that is, they bloom first down below and they bloom last up in the mountains. And I was going up and down. So you have a very long season of cherry blossoms when you walk in March and April in Shikoku. Next slide, please. The title of this talk is Walking Together. And so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Dogyo Ninin, the symbol on the hat that I wore that all pilgrims wear. The back of the hat, the front of the hat is the Sanskrit character for Kobo Daishi. And the back of the hat has this sign, Dogyo Ninin, which means the Ninin usually in Japanese is read as study, but this is a Chinese 4-character expression, and so they read it as Ninin. And the first character means together, it's onaji or together. And the second character usually means to go. So it could be two people going together, but this also is the second character for the word for religious ascetic practices, the practices part. And so in Shikoku, this means two people who are engaging together in religious practices, or not two people, and what this means is that the pilgrim is walking together with Kūkai, and Kūkai will be offering his protection and his benevolence to help the pilgrim on such an arduous undertaking. And so for this reason, many people who live along the way show great respect toward pilgrims because they think of them as walking with Kūkai, and by showing kindness to a pilgrim, you're showing kindness to this great religious teacher, Kūkai himself. Next slide, please. And so one of the ways in which people show kindness, it could be many ways, and many people would just shout out, take care of yourself, or wishing you a good pilgrimage, or I hope you make it successfully. A lot of kind comments that people would make as they passed you. But in many cases, people would do something which was called osettai. And in Japanese, generally osettai means, I guess, hospitality toward a guest. But in this part of Shikoku, osettai means showing a kindness to a pilgrim. And so I have these 5 pictures that illustrate examples of osettai. In the upper left, the person in the sunglasses and the bicycle helmet was a retired English teacher. And from the day after he retired, he told me, he began riding his bike about half an hour to a bridge that was the entrance to the town where he lived. And this bridge was kind of a confusing point because the path diverges, and depending on which inn you're staying at, you might go a different direction. It wasn't so clear. And so he would ride to the bridge and give directions to people and engage with pilgrims. He also gave out a little bit of some sweets. And then he also would help people if they didn't have accommodation. He would make phone calls and help them find a place to stay. So I talked with him for about 20 minutes, and we took this selfie together. And then when I left, he asked me to sign his book. And I think I was pilgrim number 880 that he had helped along the way. He was, very happy to kind of collect names of pilgrims and where we were from. In the upper right, I met this farmer because I ran out of water one day, and it was a very rural area. There weren't places to get something to drink. And so when I finally got to a farmhouse, I saw that this farmer had a hose in front of his house, and he was outside. So I asked him, can I use your garden hose to refill my water? And he, of course, said yes. But then he invited me up into his greenhouse. This is where this picture was taken. And he was drying sweet potatoes that he had harvested and then sliced very thin, kind of like a thick potato chip almost. And he was drying them to keep them to preserve them. And so he told me to wait for a second, went into his kitchen, got a plastic bag, and he's filling the bag with these dried sweet potatoes for me to take with me along my way. And then he wished me a pleasant journey. On the left is a little plastic bag that is filled with rice crackers and cookies and hard candies. And someone driving along the road stopped as I was walking by, rolled down the window and handed me this bag. And she had made up a bunch of bags. These bags were in her front seat, and as she sees a pilgrim, stops and hands them a bag and says, "Here, this is to encourage you to keep going," is what she said. And so I could snack on the senbei and the candy along the way. In the middle was when I was on a ferry, and this is one of the days it snowed. It was probably about 38 degrees Fahrenheit and windy. So I was cold on this ferry. I had all my clothes on, wearing my gloves, and I was cold. And this man walked up to me and said, "Here, I think you need this." And he handed me a hand warmer that he had. It's the kind where you shake it and then it gives out warmth for an hour or so. And it was very nice to have that in my pocket and have my hands be warmed on the ferry. And on the right were oranges. I did get gifts of fruit very frequently, but this one was particularly special because I was sitting at a temple having my lunch, and a German pilgrim came, and she sat down next to me, and she was having her lunch as well. And I noticed she was eating Japanese food as well. And so we talked about how much we liked Japanese food, and it was wonderful for lunch. But then she said, I wish the one thing I miss is I would like to have more fruit. And 2 minutes later, this man walked up to us, and he had a box of oranges, and he gave each of us 3 oranges and said, "Here, this is from my orchard. Please take this, and may it help you complete your journey." And it was just amazing that almost like magic, these fruits appeared. As we were saying, we would have liked some fruit to have with our lunch. So next slide, please. So now let me talk a little bit now about some of the customs that have evolved along the Camino, along the pilgrimage. And I must say, as I mentioned, I walked 2 Christian pilgrimages in Europe. And I must say, one thing that struck me was how, like these pilgrimages in Europe, various customs and legends have grown. And I'm sure there was no contact between pilgrims in Japan and pilgrims in medieval Europe. And yet it must be something about us as humans that you want to believe certain things and have certain stories. And often the story was either someone doing a good deed and being rewarded, or someone doing a bad deed and being punished. And this was something that was very common along the Shikoku pilgrimage, as well as it was along the pilgrimages in Europe. This particular legend I'm going to talk about is not actually either doing good or evil, but Kūkai was a prolific writer. He wrote a lot of texts, and he wrote a lot about his travels in Shikoku when he was a young person. And he wrote at one point in his travel that he got completely wet from the hard rain and went under a bridge to spend the night and seek some shelter from the rain. And what he wrote in his memoirs was, "I was so cold and shivering that the one night felt like 10." And of course, that bridge that he sheltered under does not exist. That was in the 7th century. But there is a bridge over the river today where this is occurred. And under that bridge is a statue of sleeping Kūkai. It's a kind of a cute one. It's about 3 feet long, I guess you could say. But people who live nearby make little blankets and put the blankets over the statue to keep the statue warm at night. It's their way of expressing their devotion to the memory of Kūkai. But today, along the pilgrimage, because of this legend about Kūkai sleeping under a bridge, the custom for pilgrims who carry a walking stick or staff is that you don't use your staff when you're crossing a bridge, because the clacking sound you make might waken Kūkai, who might be sleeping under that bridge. So the custom is, as you're walking along with your sticks, when you get to the bridge, you carry the stick across the bridge, and then you can start using it again on the other side. So this is just an example of one of the customs that has evolved from the legends that come out of this historical pilgrimage. Next slide, please. Another thing I'll mention, and this relates to people as well, but it's pilgrim lodging. A lot of people ask, well, where did you sleep when you were along the way? And most nights I slept in minshkus, which are family-run small inns. Many of the ones I used were very small, maybe between 3 and 6 rooms, so not many people. And they serve breakfast, dinner the night before, and breakfast. You're using the same bath that they use. It's called a kazuko buro. And so all the pilgrims and the family are in the same bath. You're eating together with the family. And the thing I liked about it, I had my own room. On the left is a picture of a 6-mat room, which was very typical, where I would sleep and they would have a futon laid out. in the room, and then you'd share a bathroom and share the bath itself. But what I liked about it was the dinner where you're eating with the other pilgrims, sometimes with the family, and it was a chance to talk about what you were experiencing, but also the route ahead. And in particular, I was very grateful when one of the pilgrim guests was a repeater. He had been walked the pilgrim 7 or 8 times before, and so that pilgrim could talk about the route ahead. And sometimes you also ran into a pilgrim who was walking the other way, walking counterclockwise, and he could tell you about, this part is really muddy. You might want to use the road instead of the path in this part. And so it was very helpful to hear all these stories. But the other reason I liked the minshkus was the hospitality of the families. Many of the minshkus along the way are run by people who've walked the pilgrimage themselves. They're very desirous of being helpful to pilgrims. It was part of Osetai. And in this case, this minshku I stayed at, it was my 3rd night, and it was a father and mother and a boy in junior high school. And when I was leaving the minshku, it took me a while to put my shoes on and get my pack going and get my sticks. And so the mother saw me leaving and called her husband and her son to come out. And her son, he's a 7th grader. He's got other things to do, but he came out too, and they all bowed to me and wished me a successful journey. And then I turned around and saw them waving at me. And it just made me feel so good to have that kind of hospitality along the way. I did stay in temple lodging 5 times, and I don't really have many pictures of temple lodging because the rooms were very similar. It'd often be a 6-mat room you'd stay in. If you were a group, they'd put you in a bigger room. And those were much larger, often between 20 and 80 rooms. It was almost like a big hotel. But the special thing about temple lodging was you would be invited to participate in the morning otsutome, which is the priest reciting the sutras in front of the chief image. And one reason I didn't take pictures there because I didn't think it was appropriate, but one of the things I enjoyed about that was you could go inside the hondo at where the priest was and sit facing the chief image. And often the main images at the temples were covered up. They weren't available to people to walk, and you would pray toward the image, but you couldn't actually see it in many temples. And this was a chance to actually go inside and hear the priest and give and pay respects to the chief image. And then always at the end of the otsutome, the priest would invite everyone together to recite the Heart Sutra. Sometimes I stayed in business hotels, and in particular, I did this when it was a big city and there might be 8 or 9 temples where you might walk 2 or 3 days within the city to do that. And instead, I could take a bus from where I had ended the day, go to the hotel, leave my things in the room, and then the next morning take a bus back to where I'd left off and continue my walk. And so this was a way of relieving my pack for a couple of days. And also the business hotels, there was a little more flexibility. You didn't have to take the bath when the owner told you to take the bath. You didn't have to have dinner right at the same time. And while I love the minshkus, it was nice to have a break once in a while. Interestingly, of the 4 business hotels I stayed at, 3 of them provided me osetai. When I came in, they saw I'm wearing pilgrim garb, and in 2 cases, they gave me a pilgrim discount as osetai of about $10. And in one case, it was a town, Imabari, which is famous for towels in Japan. And they gave me a little towel with the name of their hotel inscribed on it that I actually used because it was getting hot by this time, and I used it to wrap around my head under my hat. So even these business hotels would have osetai. The average cost, by the way, for the minshkus, the sort of where you spent the night, you got a bath and you had dinner and breakfast, was about 7,000 to 8,000 yen, like $50 to $60 US, which I thought was very reasonable compared to prices in most developed countries. It really was an inexpensive way to travel. Next slide, please. The Henro diet. Let me talk about this a little bit. It was my favorite diet ever because I ate all I wanted and I still lost weight. When I weighed myself coming home, I'd lost about 10 pounds. Obviously, a lot of that was from the walking and the climbing up and down hills. But still, the food was very good. On the left was a dinner. To be honest, I wouldn't say this was a typical dinner. This was an amazing dinner. But typically, almost every meal you'd have sashimi of some sort. And particularly, many of the places I stayed were fishing villages. And so in this case as well, this was a fishing village. And other than the salmon, on the plate, which I think had been frozen. Every other item of fish was caught in that fishing village. So we had a fresh mackerel, fresh katsuo, tuna, fresh amaebi, the sweet shrimp. And then we'd have, the other thing was very vegetable intensive. I think on this dinner, I counted 6 vegetables from the land and 5 vegetables from the ocean. So lots and lots of things to eat. It was springtime, so we had a lot of fresh bamboo shoots. We had a lot of nanohana, I guess it's safflower buds, were very common. And cooked really nicely. I must say, people took pride in the cooking. This particular place on the left was known for its fresh food. And what she told me was every single item there, except for the salmon, was something that either they had made or they had bought locally. Even the umeboshi, the pickled plums, once a year, they pickle from their tree all the umeboshi that they serve throughout the year. So the tofu was from a local tofu store. The mountain vegetables were things that people had picked up in the mountains. And then breakfast, which is on the right, was obviously much more simple, but still a lot. You could have all the rice you wanted at any meal. It was, I usually had 2 bowls because I was hungry. Some people had 3 bowls of rice. Generally, you'd have some kind of fish for breakfast. If not, in the mountains where fish was harder to come by, they might have ham or a little hot dog or something instead. Often an egg. In this case, it was a raw egg, which was very common. You'd break that over your rice. And the lower right is fermented soybeans, natto, which was also very common to have in the morning, and then miso soup. Often you could have refills of miso soup, and then pickles. Every morning and evening you had pickles, and often umeboshi. This was an area of Japan famous for their umeboshi, their salted pickled plums. So I ate very well. Usually during the daytime, I tried not to eat a big lunch because I made that mistake. If you had a large lunch, it was hard to keep walking. It felt very slow. So I would kind of eat snacks along the way. Next slide, please. The other way in which locals make the journey easier for pilgrims is by providing rest areas. This is just 2 pictures, but on a typical day, there would be 2 or 3 or 4 rest areas along the way. So every 60 to 90 minutes, you'd find by the side of the road a sign saying, pilgrim rest area ahead. Often the pilgrim rest area was built by a local business. Very frequently, it'd be a small construction firm that would build a nice rest area. Sometimes it'd be like the Lions Club or the Kiwanis Club or some other entity. On the left, I took this picture. This was a very large rest area, and that day was raining, and I was getting hungry, and I didn't want to eat while it was being rained on. And so I was very grateful for this rest area that had a roof overhead and a table. This rest area, by the way, was overlooking the ocean, but you couldn't see the ocean from the ground because there was a seawall that was built. And so they very thoughtfully built the rest area about 15 feet above ground so you could sit at the picnic table and admire the ocean while you were eating. And here I met 3 female Japanese pilgrims who were traveling together. And they were the ones that gave me the idea about staying in a business hotel and then using buses, because that's what they were doing. They were every night staying in a hotel and for 3 or 4 nights, because I wondered why they didn't have packs with them. And they told me that was how they did that. And so I got that idea from them. On the right is a rest area that is being furnished by a Christian church, actually. And they had a big sign in English. It's a little hard to read here, but it says restrooms available. And there was a little sign. You can see the men and lady sign and a little arrow. There was a bench. It was the parking lot that had a roof over it, so it had shade. And the thing I really appreciate about this rest area, the restroom, of course, but it had an ice machine. And so you could get ice to put in your water and cool things down. And that was very nice. But many, many people along the way have furnished these rest areas that are very welcome. Next slide, please. I should mention again, pilgrims' support, and in particular, the people along the way were amazing. And I'll just tell a few stories. This person on the left, you can see we're getting into his car. And the reason for that is that I was not paying attention for part of the path and took a wrong turn. And about half an hour later, I realized I hadn't seen a sign in a while and looked at my map and realized I had gone off the path. And then I made the foolish decision, rather than walking an hour back to where the path was, I thought I could take a shortcut and go down this road, and that would take me back to the path. And so I started walking down the shortcut. And this man who's you see in the picture was walking his dog, and he asked me, he could see I'm in my pilgrim attires. He said, "Oh, are you going to the temple?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you're going the wrong way." And I asked him, "Well, isn't this the shortcut to get back to the path?" And he said, "No, you can't. It doesn't go through." And so he then said, "Here, follow me." And he walked me with his dog back to his house, left his dog behind, and told me to get in the car, that he would give me a ride back to the trailhead. And so we got in the car. And as we were driving, he's a pretty elderly gentleman. I'm guessing he was in his 70s. And he said, "You know, when I was a young boy, my friends and I used to walk up to the temple on Saturdays. It's up a pretty steep mountain." And he said, "You know, I can't do that anymore, but I'm so happy to help someone who's walking on my childhood path." So he gave me a ride to the trailhead, and then, you know, I got out, and he went off. On the right is a picture of the caretaker at a small temple that I had visited. And the temples along the way, I should say, the temple offices are open from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. And not only the office, but to worship, you really need the temple to be open, because they cover up the place where you leave your incense and your candles, because they're worried about fires. And so you can't light incense and light your candle outside these hours, because the places are closed for fire safety reasons. So I didn't realize how close this temple was to where I was staying. I foolishly thought I'll get an early start and get going that morning. And so I arrived at the temple about 10 after 7. And then I realized, the temple won't be open for about 45 more minutes. But it was a nice morning. It was a little cool, but I thought I'll sit on this bench and listen to the birds and just admire the early morning. And pretty soon this man came. I think he was kind of the caretaker, and he was getting his brooms out to sweep, and he saw me and was quite concerned. He said, "You know, aren't you cold?" And actually, I wasn't that cold. I said, "No, I'm fine." And then he said, "The temple's not open until 8." And I said, "Yes, you know, I knew that. I had come early, so I'm just sitting here." And then he disappeared and came back with the keys, and he opened the Daishido, the Kūkai's hall, and said, "Here, why don't you come and sit inside? We're not open, but come here and sit inside out of the cold." So I, excuse me, I went inside, and then 10 minutes later, he came back and said, "Oh, the priest has invited you to come and listen to the Otsutome, the morning sutras." And so he brought me into the main hall. And the priest, of course, is sitting on a very thin pillow on the tatami floor, but they had very thoughtfully provided a chair, so I could sit on a chair instead of having to sit on the floor for the 45 minutes of the sutras being chanted. So it was, again, just a kindness that they shared with me to an early arriving pilgrim. Next slide, please. Here are 2 more examples of people along the way who helped me. Along the right of the slide on the right, or the picture on the right, is a man. His name is Okada, and he runs a minshuku called Okadaya. That's why I remember his name. And this is a very famous minshuku along the route, because his minshuku is at the base of the steepest, hardest climb to the highest temple along the Shikoku Pilgrimage. It takes about 4 hours, and it's very steep and rocky slope. It is a challenging way up there. And if you can stay at his minshuku, at least you're starting the day very close. But he only has 3 rooms in his minshuku. It's very hard to get an accommodation there. So most people stay further away and then take a bus or a taxi to get to the base of the slope. But while we have dinner, he sits there. He's almost holding court, if you will, at the end of the table, and he has this picture book, and he's showing us pictures of every single step you take in order to climb the mountain, because there's a lot of twists and turns and signs and things you might miss. And so he's giving you about a 20-minute explanation to make sure you don't get lost the next day as you climb the hill. And he's very famous because he's been running this minshuku for almost 60 years. Now his daughter-in-law does, frankly, most of the work. She was the one that cooked dinner and did the cleaning. But he comes every night at dinner and explains to pilgrims how to not get lost on this ascent up the mountain. On the left was a woman who I was walking actually along a bicycle path. And this is actually in the middle of a city. It's The cities were my least favorite part of walking, although it was fine, but there's a lot of crosswalks and traffic lights and you have to stop. And so whenever there was a bike path, I loved walking on the bike path because you could walk an hour or two through the city, usually along a river, and not have to do all the stopping. And this woman was riding her bicycle towards me, and she obviously identified me as a pilgrim from way off. And as I got near her, she stopped her bike and first addressed me in English, and then we switched to Japanese, and we had about a half-hour conversation. She was very curious about where I had started, why I was walking, what I thought of the pilgrimage, had I eaten udon, because this udon is famous in this area. A very friendly person. And then as I was saying goodbye, because I had more walking to do, she opened her wallet and gave me 1,000 yen, about $8, I guess. And she said, here, this is for your lunch. I'd like you to have your udon lunch on me. And I had been taught by this elementary school principal, you never refuse a gift. Even if you plan on walking and someone gives you a ride, it would be selfish to refuse the gift. And, I didn't need her money, but I knew I should accept it. So I thanked her very profusely. And then her response, she interrupted me as I was thanking her. And she said, no, 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 I'm the one who should thank you, because by accepting my gift, you are allowing me to join you along your pilgrimage. And that really taught me something, because along the way, I was working on certain things. And one of the things I was working on was remembering to feel gratitude for my blessings in life. I was trying to practice that as I was walking. And this taught me that, giving is obviously a virtuous thing, and that's something to be appreciated. But receiving with grace is also valuable, because that allows the giver to feel virtuous about themselves. And clearly she felt good, giving me money. And so by accepting it graciously, I realized I was allowing her, and because she was so honest, to feel good about what she was doing. And so I was certainly grateful toward her, but also grateful for the lesson she taught me about being someone who is gracious in receiving gifts. Next slide, please. So this was on the top was a picture of my last dinner at a Minshku. It was right outside Temple 88. There's a well-known Minshku there. And for those of you who've been to Japan, you'll recognize in the lower left, the Minshku owner was serving sekihan, which is rice that's been boiled with azuki beans. And the azuki beans color the rice kind of a reddish color, and red is a celebratory color in Japan. And so as we were there, this was a mountain temple. So the sashimi we got was carp, freshwater sashimi, not as nice as the ones along the ocean, but she had a lot of mountain vegetables that she had gathered, and tempura vegetables, and also udon noodles as well as the rice. But she also said, there's plenty of sekihan here. This is a celebration because you reached the final temple. So please help yourself to as many bowls of sekihan as you want. And then the next day I left that Minshku and walked back toward Temple 1. It actually took me 2 days to walk from this Minshku to Temple 1 because it was about 50 kilometers, and I decided to break it up a little bit. But the lower right picture is of me reaching Temple 1, and I saw a pilgrim who was just embarking on her pilgrimage, and I asked her if she would please take a picture of me because I had just finished the pilgrimage. And so she took this picture of me, and I'm very happy. My shoes were about shot by then. And I was so glad I had been on the pilgrimage, but also, frankly, glad to have finished. Next slide, please. And this is my last one. One other tradition that pilgrims have is when you complete your pilgrimage successfully, since Kūkai was accompanying you and helping you overcome the hardships of the pilgrimage and go along the way, it's appropriate to go to Koyasan, where Kūkai's mausoleum is, and to give thanks at his mausoleum. And so I did travel. It's a long way from Shikoku. You take a I took a bus. Now there are bridges, so you take a bus to Kobe, and then took a couple of trains to get from Kobe over to Wakayama, and got up to Koyasan, which is in the mountains, and gave thanks for having safely completed my pilgrimage. One aside, by the way, many of you, because you are people who all like Japan, that's why you're here at this webinar, and you've heard about over-tourism, how famous spots in Kyoto and in Tokyo are overcrowded. But Koyasan had tourists. It wasn't deserted, but it's not overcrowded. And I would really encourage people planning a trip to Japan to think about a place like Koyasan. There probably are, I'm guessing, 15 or 20 temples there, and many of them date from 12th, 13th, 14th century, the very old buildings. There are a lot of priests there. They're very active, vibrant temples. The lower right picture is a photograph of priests who are carrying between them the rice that they are bringing to the dining hall where they're going to eat their main midday meal. And you can stay at some of these temples overnight and experience the life of a priest. You'll eat vegetarian food and participate in the otsutome like I did, waking up early in the morning. And so it is a nice thing to do. And I went there and thought, it's a beautiful place, and there were plenty of tourists, but it was not overcrowded. And so I would encourage people to think about places like this. But I want to thank all of you. You've been very patient. I'm going to stop here and open things up for questions. I'll turn things over to Shanti Shoji, who will moderate this session for us. Thank you, Shanti.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I know we can't hear everybody, but I'm sure we're all clapping for the really great discussion. Thank you so much. There were so many questions that I have been kind of ciphering through, so we can get them all together. Let's see how much time we have. Okay, we have about 20 minutes. And for having prerogative of the moderator, and I just, Ryan Schaefer from Japan American Society of Washington, D.C., thank you so much for the very kind intro. But, as a Jet who lived in Shikoku and Kagawa for 2 years, the 88 Pilgrimage Temple walk was a huge part of my existence there. And I'm just curious, what was your why? I knew people or Jets who wanted to do the pilgrimage, but I'm curious for you, why did you want to do that? And what did you find other people, why they wanted to do the temple walk?
No, that's a very good question, Shanti. Thank you. In my case, because I had undergone 2 pilgrimages in Europe, and I'd heard a lot about the 88 temples from my Japanese host mother when I was a high school student there years ago. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to do some reflection, some self-improvement efforts. Along the way, I asked many Japanese pilgrims, and one thing I should say is most of my pilgrim interactions at inns were elderly Japanese men. I think a lot of female pilgrims feel more comfortable staying in a hotel where they have their own bathroom. So I didn't interact with as many Japanese women. And the places I was staying at, there were very few foreigners. I saw foreigners along the pilgrimage route, but the places I was staying at required you to call by telephone to make a reservation because they're not modern facilities. And so a lot of foreigners had trouble there. So to answer your question, the pilgrims I talked to are mostly Japanese men, retired over 60. I think they're really reflecting on their life and thinking about, their remainder of their life and the afterlife and how they lived and what they would like to do. So it was, for many, a very spiritual event. I would say, compared with my experience in Europe, where there's many of the pilgrims are younger, and in that case, many of the people walking along the Santiago to Compostela routes were in a life transition. Maybe they were changing jobs, maybe they just finished school, just had a death in the family and were processing that. So in case of younger people in Europe, it was a transition. And I wouldn't be surprised in Japan if I talked to pilgrims in their 30s and 40s if that was also the case for them.
And you noted about having to make some calls to make accommodations, and it could be challenging. We've had a lot of people. I think maybe you should start a YouTube channel on how you traveled, what your tips were, because there's lots of questions of, I think, people who want to do this now, which is really exciting.
Yeah, one quick thing is if anyone's interested in doing the pilgrimage, there's 2 really good Facebook groups. And if you go into Facebook and do a search under Shikoku Henro Pilgrimage, they're run by 2, one's a German and one's an American. They live in Shikoku, and they are and I learned a lot from them before the pilgrimage. So I would definitely consider that as one way of beginning your preparation.
Okay, great. And putting some questions together, one person asked, how many Americans did you see? So curious about both Americans, but also just non-Japanese you saw on the pilgrimage.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't see, it might have partly been time of year because I started late February and finished in mid-April. So there might be more foreigners at other times. And to be honest, a little bit embarrassingly, many of the foreigners I met because I would talk to them in Japanese, and then they would answer me in English saying, I'm from Hong Kong, I don't speak Japanese, or I'm from Taiwan, I don't speak Japanese. And so a lot of the foreigners I met were from other countries where Buddhism is a big religion, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong in particular. I met pilgrims from there. I did meet a fair number of European pilgrims and Canadian pilgrims who had heard about the pilgrimage for various reasons. Not so many Americans, a few, but not maybe 5 or 6 along the way, but not so many.
And along this line, I know you have a great book, maybe it's next to you, but there's many people asking if they don't speak Japanese, is it possible to do this trip? So maybe you could, the end of that book is amazing, so.
Yeah, there's a book. It's hard to see here. It's called Shikoku Japan 88 Route Guide. Maybe I'll ask William later. You can post a picture of this. That it has detailed maps and instructions. And that is something that's very, very valuable. There's another book by a gentleman named Don Weiss. I'll maybe give that to William to post later, who has written a walking pilgrim's guide. And that he's a German, but he wrote it in English, and it's very helpful as well. So there are resources available. So yes, you can do the pilgrimage not speaking Japanese. And many of the minshkus, I mentioned how they're a little hard to reserve, but often what foreigners would do is they'd stay at a minshku and then they'd ask that person to call ahead and reserve the next night or 2 nights down the road. And many of I spoke in Japanese to minshku owners, so I'm not quite sure the English level, but they're pretty used to foreigners and use a mix of Google Translate and sign language. I would encourage people to learn Japanese etiquette, like how to take a bath, but I think most people would know that anyway, even before they start the pilgrimage.
Wonderful. People were also asking about, you did the entire circle and you walked it. Can you do shorter walks? Can you do it in pieces? If you could talk a bit about that.
Yes, and in fact, I would say a walking pilgrim who completes the 88 temple pilgrimage all at once is not that common. And there, the percentage of foreigners who do that is much higher. And the reason for that is a lot of Japanese do what they call kugiri, which is to cut the pilgrimage into pieces. And so especially people who are still working and don't have 2 months to take off and walk on a pilgrimage, they will come down and spend 4 nights to 12 nights maybe and walk a portion and then go back home and then a year later come back and continue their pilgrimage. So many Japanese I met, it was often disappointing to me because I would meet someone and we'd really get along well, and they'd say, oh, tomorrow's my last day, I'm going back to Chiba because I have work on Monday. So people can do it that way. There were some people taking bicycles and doing it by bicycle, but I would say, and there were people on these group tours. It was often elderly Japanese men and women who would be in a group of 20 or 30 people on these microbuses driving around from temple to temple. And talking to them, their tours, they could visit all 88 temples in about 2 weeks. Because there were some parts like it might be 3-day walk between 2 temples, and in a bus you could do it in an hour. So you can obviously get through the parts more quickly. So that was another way of doing things, is by bus. But I would say the vast majority of pilgrims, the Japanese pilgrims, are in their own private vehicle. These temples all had parking lots, and very typically it'd be a couple, and often it'd be a couple whose children had gone. The husband just retired, and they were doing this as kind of a trip together. So that I'm sure there was a bonding aspect to that as well. And when I talked to many of them, because they weren't tied to staying at lodging right on the pilgrimage route, often they were staying at hot springs. And when they finished their last temple, they'd drive off to a hot spring and spend the night and then drive back to where the next temple was. So I was a little jealous now and again to see the people pulling up in their automobiles, but they were very sincere about doing their rituals at the temples. I mean, they were good pilgrims in that sense. And there's no stigma of driving or taking the bus. I mean, it's different people do it different ways.
All right. We also, speaking of people going to onsens and the minshku, there's a lot of kind of the local economy and shops and people that are a part of having the system there so that pilgrims can make it. And we've heard a lot about local revitalization efforts in Japan, especially in the rural areas. How important is this pilgrimage system that exists, ecosystem, I should say, exist for those local communities? Do you think it's an area that could be expanded upon to help them? It sounds like you said there wasn't much tourism there. Curious about your kind of broader view of U.S.-Japan relations in that sense.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, and certainly the four prefectures where the pilgrimage exists all recognize that this is a potential benefit, economic benefit, by promoting tourism and going to the Shikoku Henro pilgrimage. Of the 88 temples there, some are very small and in pretty remote areas. Some are huge. In fact, of the three great Shingon temples in Japan, one is Koyasan, one is Toji Temple in Kyoto, and one is Zentsuji in Shikoku. And I was kind of surprised when I got to Zentsuji. I actually spent the night there, and there were hundreds and hundreds of tourists there, on these day trips, taking a bus, going around doing different things. And that temple seemed very well off because people are donating money and buying roof tiles to help repair the roof or whatever they were doing. Some of the smaller temples obviously didn't have great financial resources, and I'm sure it was hard for them. So there is an effort to promote the pilgrimage as a tourist destination. But there's more work that could be done. But I would certainly encourage people, even if you don't want to walk all 88 temples, think about traveling to Shikoku. There's nice people, and think about visiting some of the temples because they really are quite remarkable experiences. And the other thing I should mention, by the way, that's changed a lot, and it's a little unfortunate, but when you read accounts of pilgrims in the 60s and 70s, they talk about these small mom and pop shops that they would pass along the way, selling Coca-Cola and snacks and things. And most of those small shops are now closed. What you have instead are convenience stores, and they were all over the place, 7-Eleven and Family Mart and Lawson's. And I must say, I was a frequent user of the convenience stores because Japanese convenience stores, unlike American ones, all have a bathroom, and the bathrooms are clean and they're welcoming. You can use the facilities there. And then they had snacks you could buy. I didn't want to carry a lot of food with me. So you could count on going to a convenience store and buying things for lunch, using the facilities. They had wonderful brewed coffee from machines for 100 yen. It was a deal, I thought. And so very frequent. In fact, this guidebook talks about where the convenience stores are. And in the way, it was sad that you didn't have the mom and pop shops anymore, but there were certainly plenty of places to buy things. The other thing I should mention is there are lots of vending machines along the way. I mean, thousands of them. And the thing that was remarkable to me is in the United States, vending machines are only in enclosed areas where people can lock them up at night because we have so much vandalism. And there you'd have a vending machine on the side of a highway in the middle of nowhere. And obviously they're making money because they wouldn't keep the machine going. You could buy your hot and cold coffee or your Coca-Cola or your juice on the side of the road. I don't see machines like that in the United States. So that was another thing I really appreciated was all the vending machines.
We have just a few minutes left, and so I'll try to kind of grab questions that I can together. People have asked, what was the toughest part of the experience?
The toughest part, there are highs and lows like anywhere. And just one day, I remember it had rained hard, so I was really wet. So my clothes were rubbing against me. My pack was heavy, and I was looking for a rest stop so I could get out of the rain. And I got to one rest stop, but it was raining so hard that even under the roof, I was still getting wet. So I kept going, and I was getting hungry. And finally, I found a boathouse on the side of a lake, and there was a porch. And so I went up to the boathouse, and I was out of the rain, but I was so tired I could not punch the little button to loosen the strap on my pack to get my pack off. I was just too tired, and I was using both hands and pushing. My hands were shaking. So finally, what I did, I thought I have to get this pack off. I need some rest. There was a vending machine there. I don't normally drink Coca-Cola, but I went and grabbed a Coke. And with the sugar high, I was able to get my pack off and do a nice half-hour rest. And then I felt better and could get going again. So that was probably my low point, was being cold, wet, and miserable, and too tired to even get my pack off my shoulders.
If only Coca-Cola, that's a great commercial idea for.
Yeah, I'm not average. I needed the sugar, and that
Coca-Cola.
was what was available. But that's I mean, I tell that story, but mostly it was high points. I would give myself incentives, like I had this map, and so I could say, okay, there's a convenience store coming up in an hour. I'm going to stop there and get an ice cream bar because I'm hot, or I'm going to get my lunch there, or this temple is coming up, and so I would set for myself little incentives. If I go this far, I'll get to this nice thing. And I must say, the other thing I learned is when I was walking with someone, it went much faster than walking by myself. I mean, it really is true that when you have a journey with other people, it really makes the journey less rigorous and less difficult.
And I'll ask, I think, two last questions. One that we've heard from several people, including your friend. Let me, if I say the name, it'll make you happy. So let me just get it real quick. Oh, so Mark Wall.
Oh, yes. Hi, Mark.
Is beaming in from Honolulu. So he asked, and some others have asked, are you going to do another pilgrimage? And also, why Japan? Why do you love Japan? What is it about Japan for you? You've lived there 17 years. You walked 750 miles.
I'm hoping to do another pilgrimage. We'll see, if my body holds up and so forth. But yes, why Japan? I mean, I love Japan, and I had been to Shikoku on business trips a lot, but hadn't done much tourism there, so I wanted to really get to know a part of Japan I didn't know as well. But frankly, another reason was the previous long distance walk I had done was mostly in Portugal, and I don't speak Portuguese, and there were a lot of nice people there too, but I felt frustration of having to use sign language with people when I could have had a deeper conversation. And one reason for going to Japan was I knew I could talk to people, and the conversations I had with farmers and others along the way were some of the highlights of my pilgrimage. So that was one reason for choosing Japan. And then also I was interested in Buddhism. I didn't know much about Kūkai or Shingon Buddhism before I went on the pilgrimage, so I thought it was a chance to learn as well, and I certainly did learn a lot.
And I said two more, and this is the third one. This will be the last one. With so much experience in Japan, you've even been married in Japan in a Buddhist temple. You've seen the ins and outs of Japan at their best, supporting them through horrific disasters. I feel like you're the American that knows it all, but was there anything that surprised you along your journey that you take away that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise?
Yes, no, thank you for saying that. And by the way, for the record, my wife and I were married in a Buddhist temple, but it was in Los Angeles, and that's all right. And if I want to shock a Japanese when we're talking, I'll tell them I got married in a Buddhist temple because I don't think often the answer I get is only priests get married in a Buddhist temple in Japan. So that's in a way more of an American thing, I think, is for American Buddhists than it is for Japanese. But anyway, yes, the thing that surprised me, and it shouldn't have, but it did, is, Japan, I mean, we are to an extent too, but it's a pretty hierarchical society in the sense that when you meet someone in Japan, you exchange name cards and people look at the title of you on your name card and then kind of figure out where you are in the company or in the organization you're with. And while you're on the pilgrimage, no one has a name card and no one has a title. You have a name, and you all have the same economic status because you're carrying everything you own on your backpack, which is a change of clothes and some soap and a few things. So it's very egalitarian, and no one really asks, how much money do you make? How big is your house? What do you do? You're asking about the weather, the way ahead, why are you walking the pilgrimage? And so I really appreciated that egalitarian aspect of the pilgrimage, which is something I hadn't really experienced as much in Japan.
Wonderful. Well, we've come a little bit past our time, so I just want to thank you so much. And Ambassador Zumwalt also spoke yesterday at Sasakawa, USA. We had an in-person event, and it was wonderful. We could have people from the Hill, government, nonprofit sector, private sector. And it's great to hear the additional questions that people have had from around the United States. Also, just so you know, Ambassador Zumwalt, there's been lots of comments about how inspiring this has been, and they really enjoy the way you present. And I think we have, I wish I could do a raise of hands of people who now want to go to Shikoku or perhaps go to some of these temples. But thank you again so much. And I see Ryan has joined us again. I just want to thank Ryan Schaefer from Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. and the teams at Sasakawa USA and Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. who worked behind the scenes to put this together. But of course, the thanks goes to you, Ambassador Zumwalt, for making the journey and sharing it with us. If I can leave it with you for a few last words, if you'd like, Ambassador Zumwalt.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate people who've spent an hour and a half of their day listening to me, because that was inspiring for me. And, you know, obviously we're all here because we love Japan. I would encourage people to go to Shikoku either as a pilgrim or as a tourist. And I'll just, as a reminder, we will be, I think, next week posting this on YouTube. So if you missed a part of it, or if you know someone who'd like to watch this, stand by, because I think you'll be getting in your email a link to the YouTube video once it's posted on our website. So thank you all very much, and let's all also, if you don't mind, if you could, because my pilgrimage was about gratitude, and I was so grateful to all the people who helped me along the way. So I wanted to thank all the people today who helped me along the way from Sasakawa USA and from the Japan American Society. Thank you all very much, and good night to everyone.
Thank you.